Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behaviour nerds, where I, Ryan Cartledge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behaviour geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behaviour nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. You'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour geeks. But we will start today's episode where I am super excited to welcome back to the ATA podcast show a fellow New Zealander and previous guest, Bex Tasker. You can hear our previous episode together as number 102 of this show, which was released at the start of October 2019. And now, over 3 years on, I'm pumped to catch up with Bex again. But if you haven't listened to it, no worries. This episode is set to be equally as fantastic. So let's dive in. Bex is a KPA Certified Training Partner and has been training animals with positive reinforcement for over 20 years, with a long-standing interest in clicker training for horses. She lives on a small farm in the beautiful Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, and under her business Positively Together, Bex teaches humans in New Zealand and around the world how to inspire behaviour change in their horses and dogs. In addition, Positively Together hosts classes where youth can experience the power of positive reinforcement and see learning and communication in action as they work hands-on with friendly trained sheep, horses, chickens, dogs, cows, pigs, and more. This youth program and multi-species focus has been growing rapidly since 2018 and has become Bex's special passion and will be the main focus of our episode today. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome back Bex to the show today. Bex, thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us again at Animal Training Academy.
Hi, Ryan. I am stoked to be here.
How is everything up there today? Because you've got a big storm, don't you?
The storm skipped past us, thankfully. Okay. There was a lot of fuss about it and some people got hit really hard, but my place was fine. I went out and gave extra hay to the horses, keeping in mind that it is the middle of summer here in New Zealand, so to be having lots of mud and rain in a big storm is slightly frustrating. But no, we survived just fine. Yep.
I think everyone around the world is feeling that frustration with the weather at the moment. You don't, the normal is things aren't normal anymore, which is scary. But that is not the focus of this podcast. Let's dive into the first question today, where I'm really excited to have an opportunity to discuss something that gets asked about often in the Animal Training Academy members-only community. And as mentioned in your bio, that is teaching about positive reinforcement to the next generation. Our members often ask about this as people might want to set up specific classes or programs for kids, or they may have been asked to come and teach a group of kids for the first time, which is, of course, a completely different audience than if you're working with a bunch of adults. It can be overwhelming and scary to start working with new audiences, especially kids, and it can make you feel those twangs of imposter syndrome. Even though we know it's wrong to feel this way as we're trainers, right? We know what we're doing. As mentioned in your bio though, Bex, working with youth is something that through your Next Gen Trainers program you do on a regular basis. You know what it feels like to start this journey. And luckily for the kids of New Zealand, as with everything you do in life, you've worked hard to overcome the hurdles I just mentioned. Consequently, I was hoping you could please start us off by sharing with the listeners of this show what this program is, how it all got started, and when/where you first started working with youth.
I'll start with that last bit. So the beginning of this journey. the very beginning of it, when I was running a drug detector dog in my early 20s, we used to go into primary schools and do like the Students Against Drugs and Drunk Driving. There was a program. I don't know if they still run that, but back then I would take the drug dog into schools, and we would speak usually to an entire assembly of most of the school and talk about the dog and what it does and sort of drugs more generally and that kind of stuff. So that was my first taste, I guess, ever of educating kids and bringing a dog in to keep them engaged and interested. And, if someone sits down with a bunch of kids and talks to them about how drugs are bad, then, they've either heard it all before, or it's not particularly interesting. But you bring in a Labrador who, what we used to do is we'd put the entire school and the teachers in a giant circle, and then we would secretly hide an odour rag in the pocket of usually one of the teachers. And then the dog would run around the entire circle, sniffing every single child, and then sit to indicate on the teacher, which of course the kids thought was absolutely hilarious. And so you can imagine how we can then take that engagement and interest and funnel it into the actual topic that we're wanting them to learn about. So that was my first taste. When my son was first thinking about starting school, so he was 4 or 5, he's now 9. So 4 or 5 years ago, we were going into school classrooms to do visits to decide to get him ready for school, basically. And this was another pivotal moment for me, was that I was quite horrified, to be honest, at some of the stuff I saw in those classrooms. So I'm talking about like boxes of baby chickens that someone had brought in because it was interesting for the kids, and watching, at that point it was a daycare child, but, picking up this tiny 2-day-old chicken and dropping it. Insufficient supervision, in other words. I went into a classroom once, and there was an aquarium, like a fish tank, full of water with absolutely nothing else in it, and a frog floating on the surface, slowly drowning. This was a tree frog. And so, the hint is in the name. He needed a branch or something to sit on. And the teacher simply didn't know any better. She'd found him in the school swimming pool, and she'd put him in a tank in the classroom, and she'd gone about her day. And I quickly ran outside and rescued him. But I guess that was a moment where I realised how much need there is for some advocacy in the space generally, and how much potential there is for quality learning from kids versus this kind of almost tokenistic, there's an animal and the kids will learn something from it, and sometimes they're learning the wrong things, as in with the poor frog. The frog was fine, by the way, but so I felt an urgent call to join that sort of the education field in that way. And then a few years later, I was employed at Riding for the Disabled, running holiday programs. So these are holiday programs for primarily like just able-bodied normal kids from the community who come in and spend all day in their school holidays riding ponies and looking after ponies. And I was managing that. So there was a bunch of teenagers who were volunteers, and they were the ones who would primarily sort of lead the horses around and supervise the kids and things like that. And what I learned from that was how much I appreciated those teenagers. So the kids were great, and it was nice, and they had a lovely time, and some of them learned to ride. But it was the teenagers who were showing such admirable commitment and turning up there every single day of the holidays and every single Saturday to help with Riding for the Disabled sort of programs, and the community that they built between each other, and the friendships and the anchor that provided for them as they went through their kind of high school years. That was the memory or the thing that really struck me the most. And I worked quite closely with those teenage volunteers running, I ran special camps for them to help keep them engaged and committed and all that kind of stuff. So when I look back at that, just as I was writing some notes for this podcast, and I was remembering that, it becomes more obvious to me why I'm now on the path that I'm on now, because it was partly from that experience. So that was kind of the very beginning of it. And from there, I started to play in the field myself and offering some programs. But yeah, remind me what the rest of that question was, Ryan, if I missed anything.
Well, no, something I was reminded of while you were talking is something that you and I were part of in 2019 when we saw Susan Freeman with Peter Clark hold a workshop in Australia. Pre-COVID, lots of traveling, it was great. And Susan's done this. If you're listening to this podcast show and listening to this episode, you might have seen Susan do this at a similar conference. But she stands up in front of a room and she says, "What are our ears for?" And people say listening. And what are our eyes for? And people say seeing. What are our mouths for? Eating. What is our behaviour for? And there's like quiet. So you made me think about that. That there's a lack of teaching and that people don't learn about behavior, but it's as Susan teaches us, it's part of the natural sciences. We've evolved this thing called behavior in order to change our environment and get consequences. Is that also play into, is that kind of where you're going with what you were saying? Or
yeah, 100%, because when you think about, and again, being a mum, and I'm homeschooling Oliver, and so, just always been obviously very involved in my child's life and his learning, and obviously with animals being my special passion, always had my eyes open to what I'm seeing in terms of what's out there and what his peers are learning and what he's learning and what that looks like. And there's a lot of teaching kids about, I don't know, like naming different animals and looking at colours and where they live, and there's some amazing education sort of in the potentially the ethology sort of field and the zoology sort of field, but the behaviour side is remarkably lacking, considering that this is something which is not only applicable to animals but to the human animal, to earthlings, as Dr. Susan Freeman would say. So to me that's a gaping hole, because the learning that I want the kids that learn with me, the thing that I want them to walk away with, yes, I want, I'm a big believer that we can change one animal's life by being an animal trainer. But if every time we influence a human, we're influencing for the positive every single animal that human will touch for the rest of their lives. And so the ripples are so much wider if we keep our focus on human behavior as opposed to only training the animals. But the thing I want them to walk away with as learners with me is this is not just a way of training animals, it's a way of being in the world and interacting with their peers and their family. And, this is, behaviour, is applicable to all earthlings. So therefore, more important, arguably, than some of these other things that we are teaching, and so much depth to the potential for what we could be teaching.
Yeah, I feel like it was only recently that frame about what we do was appreciated by me, that it's not just about training and knowing that we can modify behavior, it's a way of living. And to bring it full circle, back to Susan Freeman, not intentionally, this is just all organically flowing from us today. When Susan and some other of her LLA instructors joined us within our Animal Training Academy membership recently, and we were talking about some of the main takeaways from LLA, that was one of the things that we talked about as well, is that it's about, and if you're not sure what we're talking about, LLA, Living and Learning with Animals, is Dr. Susan Freeman's offering that she teaches twice a year, where you can go and learn about applied behavior analysis and the tools and technology that it provides us when working with animals. But that was one of the takeaways, that LLA teaches you a way of living. And back to Susan, she told me that when Summer was born, my daughter, that behavior is her superpower, and my job is to teach her that behavior is her superpower. And it excites me and brings me joy to know that you are giving that message, and that we're doing this podcast episode today to talk about that we can give this message to our young generation, because they're going to grow up, hypothetically, they're going to grow up as empowered beings doing good in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I sort of make these flippant comments about changing the world, but how better, in my opinion, to change the world than to plant these seeds and to send young people on their way, not only to improve welfare outcomes for animals, but to, and I'm not talking hypothetically, I'm not talking about idealistically, I'm talking literal examples of kids who have completely changed the way that they interact with their peers at high school, or the way that they view their own reactions to events that are outside their own control, this kind of stuff. And it's incredibly powerful. And I'm hearing feedback all the time from the parents of particularly my teenagers, and particularly, has to be said, after COVID, with mental health challenges increasing noticeably in our young people, and I'm sure in adults as well. I'm hearing all the time feedback from parents about just how important this program is, and the community that's created. So yeah, it's much more than just can we train the animal to do cute tricks? But there is a place for that, because that is often where it starts. That is often where the passion begins, where we can get people excited and interested in something silly or fun or useful. And I'm sure many people listening have been in that position themselves, where maybe it started with just, can I get my dog to have his nails trimmed without having an argument, and turns into something so much more than that. And I think that's just such an overwhelmingly common story from my clients and friends and people in the training community, which I think is super exciting. So,
yeah, your talk about the dog in schools, to get your visit there started by finding the teacher with the scent rag in their pocket. It reminded me of my work in zoos and the opportunity that we have as zoo employees to offer conservation messages to our visitors, because they are so inspired and wowed, and their minds are open to new information in that time. I don't know the right word here. The next episode of this show, we're actually going to talk about that. So just a heads up, if you're interested in that, that's coming up in the next episode. And so teaching about training opens. Is this what you find? Is this what you're saying? Teaching about animals and having sheep there and pigs and chickens and all the animals you do creates an opportunity for interest in and information about science and behaviour change.
Exactly. And, that is the key, really, I'm finding is sometimes you can get people excited and interested in all of this stuff because they've naturally got an affinity for it, because they are, and this goes for adults as well, but, if we're particularly talking about young people, they're already pony girls, or they're already lovers of cute fluffy things, or they're already got a bunny at home that they love, or whatever. And sometimes you'll get the payload, which is a kid who is completely nerdy and hyper-focused on training and behaviour. It's unusual, but sometimes you do. And those are the training nerd's dream, being able to sit down with a kid and really, pour all of your, knowledge into someone who's super excited to hear it. But more often it's about finding ways to get them excited about it. And something that I'm finding with my fairly varied menagerie that I've got now, it's meeting, and this I'm thinking particularly of sometimes of the parents and the older members of the family who have potentially a little bit of a jaded or biased view of what animals are and what they can do. And then they come and they meet, for example, my sheep. And if you think about what Joe Average on the street, and not the consumers of this podcast, because you're all much more enlightened, but the average person and the vast majority of the population of the planet, I would say, think about what sheep are. They think they're stupid. They think they are super flighty. And when they are super flighty, they interpret that as stupidity, which I think is interesting, but that's a conversation for another day. And when they meet my sheep, so I've got a team of performance sheep, which I go around and we do performances to the public, so galas and community events. I've got one coming up at the end of January with about 1,000 people, and news media are going to be there, and we perform some tricks and talk about their training and things like that. So they meet some of these sheep and they realise how much more there is to these animals. So instead of sort of putting them in a little box and making assumptions about their mental capabilities and, all that kind of stuff, they're now seeing they're not flighty and they're not stupid, actually. I mean, my valet Black Nose, my big sheep, I've just finished teaching him to fetch. So he fetches a squeaky toy. They do all sorts of clever tricks, and they let people hug them and pat them and feel their wool and all those kind of things. And it's the little experiences like that, I think, that really open people's minds to the potential for and the interest in behaviour and training. And sometimes that's all it takes to drop that pebble in and get them excited, which is what I want. Yeah.
And also, once again, it reminds me of working in zoos and people seeing the animals that we house doing certain behaviours and them going, does that mean I could do that with my dog as well? And I even had people say, can I do that with my sheep? You see, it goes further than just sheep. It goes and makes them get curious about whatever species they have living in their home. Hey, let's talk about what you've set up, though. 2018, so it's been coming on 5 years now.
Roughly,
nearly?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can you tell us about what it is, how it's evolved,
Yes.
and share more about the program?
I mean, where I first started was just with, so my focus at that point was very much, I was a horse trainer. That still is my, I guess, the thing that people mostly know me for. But so I started there was a lot of demand for programs for kids, and I was interested in exploring it. So I started, it was called Horsing Around After School. And kids, it was essentially an after school program. Kids would come for an hour and they would spend time with the horses. The kids loved it. I hated it. At the end of the term, I shelved it and went back to adults. The reason I hated it mostly, I didn't hate it, but it wasn't exciting. If I don't find myself waking up in the morning and going, yes, I'm so excited, I get to do this. And that is the way I feel about most of the teaching that I do. If I don't feel that way, then I'm always pretty quick to question, why that is, or how I could change it, or what I could do instead. The reason I didn't like it is because it felt to me like entertainment, felt to me like childcare. The kids loved it. They had a great time, and I'm sure they learned lots of valuable things, but not the things that I was most interested in, which again is the training and behaviour side, right? So there's plenty of people out there offering horsemanship and riding lessons and confidence and, all that kind of stuff. And that's valuable stuff, and it's wonderful. I'm glad that's out there in the community, but it's not my passion. So the problem, therefore, in that situation was that I was not aware of or respectful of my own reinforcers and what was most interesting and reinforcing for me as a teacher. And after all, that's what has to come first. I have to be engaged and interested and enthusiastic if I'm going to do a good job. And I've got so many ideas on things I want to do that life's too short. If I'm not really loving something, I'll move on to the next thing, rightly or wrongly. So that was my first kind of kids program. But then Next Gen Trainers, which I'm going to talk about a bit, started. And that really started because I had a couple of teenagers in my life, sort of local teenagers who were just horse obsessed and were coming and spending time with my ponies, which was lovely. And I was enjoying mentoring them. And then my best friend, Brooke, was a youth worker, and she had some clients who she had been doing like equine therapy type stuff with, and that she'd met through her church and her community work and things like that. And so she got her girls together with a couple of my girls, and we ended up with this little group. And it wasn't a paid thing. It wasn't through my business. It was just they would come out and hang out with the horses. One night they brought some tents and they stayed overnight in the paddock and shampooed the ponies and had water fights and just had a great time. And from there, the idea grew really that we could do this more and we could do it together, because Brooke and I together, I think, are a pretty formidable team. She's got the youth work. She's just graduated as a pastoral counsellor, so she's really got strongly in that area. And I've got the animals and the farm that people can come to, and the animal training side. And so together we were able to grow this thing into what is now our flagship program, which is Next Gen Trainers. And that's for tweens and teens, so primarily 12 and up. And that is an incredibly important program to me and to the community that it's part of. So these kids stay in Next Gen often for a long time. I've known some of them for 4 years, 5 years. In fact, I've got two who, Paige and Emmeline, I'm now paying as coaches. So they've come right up through the program and they're now alongside me as coaches teaching with me, which is super cool. So so Next Gen Trainers is an ongoing monthly thing, and it's always full. We've got about 20 to 25 on the books, and we usually get about 15 people at each monthly workshop. So these are full day workshops. So that's Next Gen Trainers. And then in addition to that, because I needed something that was going to offer something to the younger kids and also to the kids that did not yet have an invite to join Next Gen, I've got junior animal trainers classes. So those are, usually come for an hour or two. The way I've run it in the past has been, come for an hour during the day for homeschoolers or after school for sort of 6 weeks and learn about the animals I have here and how to train them, how to cue the behaviours they already know, how to create new behaviour. I challenge them to go home each week and try something with their own animals, so that sort of thing. So it's sort of a taster kind of a thing. So those are the primary programs that I've got. And my other favourite one is Pup Stars, which is kids and dogs. So Pup Stars Stars is fun for me because I'm passionate about being a mum and about families with their dogs, and Pup Stars is completely child focused. It's one child with their own dog, but one of their parents or their adult caregivers comes with them, and so it's a team of 3. And what I love about that program not only is the excitement that I see the kids learning how to teach their dogs cool stuff, but it's actually for me it's about helping seeing the relationship between child and parent developing, and the brainstorming and the interactions, and the way that I can sort of encourage and influence healthy communication between parent and child in some cases, and that the parent-child dynamic can be inspired by the positive reinforcement that is being used with the dogs. So that's a deeper level that obviously I don't talk to my clients about, but that's something that really drives me with that program in particular. Involving the parents actively in it rather than leaving them on the sidelines is really cool. So those are the things I've got going on at the moment, which is quite enough. And I do online classes too. Online classes on Zoom for homeschoolers, which is always very popular, sells out very quickly.
You amaze me of fitting all of it into the time that we have. I wish that we lived closer so summer could come along.
Oh, so do I. Wouldn't that be fun?
Can you share more about what's involved in the program? What do you teach? How do you teach it? Do you have a curriculum? Is it kind of show up and see what happens and go with the flow, or a bit of both? How does it work?
Yeah, a bit of both. So it depends on the program. So with junior animal trainers, I have a basic program for each week. So I don't have I'm not big on sort of really detailed curriculums and lesson plans and things like that, because I really want to be first and foremost animal-led and secondly child-led in the way that I run the classes. So I keep my groups really small, which isn't ideal for the bank balance, but it is ideal for the relationships and the learning outcomes, which obviously for me is the more important aspect. And so it's a matter of doing, having enough people in the class that you can pay your way for starters, and that you can, that I can get the group learning dynamic going on. So anyone that's been part of like particularly I find not so much seminars and bigger workshops, but the smaller learning groups, you get certainly in my horse clinics and in my kids classes where we have between 5 to 15 people at the most, you get a really exciting energy and dynamic going within the group. So that's really important to me to cultivate that, because I think the learning explodes when we do that. And so, yes, I have something of an idea of what they're learning, but I tend to be relatively fluid. I think that those who are earlier in their teaching journey would be well placed to have a detailed curriculum and lesson plans, at least to start themselves off with, that we can then pivot off. But just like when we're training our animals, we want to have a plan, but we don't want to stick to the plan no matter what, right? So we want to have a plan, and then we want to be ready to throw the plan away if our learner is way ahead of us or way behind us, or we've just completely misjudged what their response is going to be, or whatever it is. So this is hopefully ringing some bells in terms of those who are training animals regularly, because that is what we do in that situation as well. We plan ahead, we think ahead, but then we pivot. We're ready to pivot at a moment's notice, and that's how I think about my training of classes and groups of kids and of adults. It's really the same as training animals, and that's why you talked, Ryan, about the imposter syndrome, and that some of your ATA members have been talking about, or not feeling unsure. Where do I even start? How would I even do this? This isn't something I'm experienced at. I want to teach kids, but I don't know what to do. I just think it's, you mentioned it at the beginning of our conversation. I think it's really important to remember that we're trainers. We do this stuff with animals, and humans are, I'm not going to say no different, but we're just another learner. A group dynamic versus a one-on-one is definitely different, and some people excel at teaching groups and some people prefer one-on-ones. That's just, I like to think of the same sort of framework with people as I would with animals, and that really helps me to remember that I do in fact know what I'm doing. With Next Gen, we have themes. We actually have a series of ribbons, awards that they earn, things like basic training skills, and listen with your eyes, which is the animal behaviour and body language one. Various other things that they can earn. But primarily, we're not about earning and about levels. We're about relationship and community, particularly in next gen. And then in the dog classes and pup stars, I have a week for nosework games and a week for tricks. And week 1 is about basic training skills. Show me what your dog can do, and can we introduce a clicker and food reinforcement into that picture where appropriate, and that kind of thing. And then we go on to, can we put that into action with some fun, nosework games, tricks, a little bit of sort of obstacle courses is always their favourite. It's everyone's favourite. Every single kids class I do of every age, obstacle courses, we're going to call it agility, but it's all sorts of silly obstacles, is always their favourite. So if that's something you're thinking about doing, 100% get a whole lot of crap from the big, I go to Kmart if you're in New Zealand or Australia. Kmart has all sorts of fun things to make obstacles with, but just that kind of stuff. So depending on which program it is, depends, and I'm tweaking it constantly all the time as to the format of the content of the sessions anyway.
You said you've had lots of feedback and then had some feedback from parents about how it's changed kids' lives. I appreciate the sensitivity of giving specific examples, but can you think of any that you might be able to share with the listeners of this show?
Several recently have been around kids that are really struggling at school. So I think this has become more of a thing since COVID, but was always a thing. I mean, everyone's teenage years are difficult. I'm yet to meet anyone who sailed through that period of their life from sort of 11 up. The feedback from parents is a lot about so one girl I'm thinking of is really struggling to find friends that she resonates with. She's more mature. She's more thoughtful. She's very animal focused. And the other girls in her year at school are, just have different interests and she's finding it difficult to connect with people. And some of the kids are immensely popular in my programs. And I'm thinking of another girl here she's about 12, and I looked at her and I was like, man, you must be super popular at school because she's just so cool. She's sporty and she's fun and she's just awesome. And then her mum tells me that she's struggling to find friends. And I'm like, either they're different people when they're at school, which I think a lot of us can probably relate to. Maybe that's the way things are, or they've just, and I mean, I remember being like that as a teenager. Really, I was busy with horses and things like that, and my friends were going to parties and going to the shops, and I just wasn't. I'd rather be, even at a younger age, I'd rather be out in the bush and at the beach and climbing trees and things like that than vivid memory of being about 10 and being invited to a play date with a new friend, and we sat inside her house in the suburbs and watched a movie, and I just remember walking out and the sun was shining, and I was so horribly disappointed that I hadn't, it was a nice play date, but other kids would have wanted to do that, but I would have so much rather have been outside in the sun, and so I think that's the thing. It's giving these kids a place where they can be and where they can meet other kids like them, and they can feel a real anchor to that community and the people, and to myself as an objective kind of adult who cares. They've just highlight of my life. They described me as like the cool auntie. That's how I want them to see me. And so it's having someone in their life that, and some of them really, especially one-on-one, tell me some pretty heavy stuff. And so it pays to be, and this is less about weekly classes and one-offs, and this is more about the relationships that I've built on a longer term basis, obviously, but it does pay to, I guess, have thought about these things ahead of time and to be prepared for how you might respond, and being responsible about notifying anyone that needs to be notified and things like that. I haven't had any super heavy ones, but it's amazing what comes out of a sort of fairly sullen, fairly quiet teenager's mouth when they're just quietly brushing a horse, and you're on the other side of the horse brushing the horse, and suddenly the conversation starts flowing in a way that their parents would never manage to achieve. So things like that, really.
Well, it sounds like a location, a context full of reinforcers and with a lack of aversives, and safe space, in other words, and a great potential definition for a community. Yeah,
safe space is the biggest, and that's something that I feel really good about, very reinforcing for me because it is something that I prioritise incredibly highly. And that goes for I've had people comment on this with the horse clinics that I run for adults as well. So it's not just kids that need a safe learning space, but really prioritising creating that safe culture right from the first moment, because just like with our animals, our learners can't learn effectively unless they're feeling safe and comfortable, both physically and emotionally. So I think, many of us have been in a situation where we've been a learner and we haven't felt particularly safe, and you end up just fading into the background and not saying anything or removing yourself promptly. Or I've heard a lot of stories of those kind of situations at horsemanship clinics or at classes and, non-animal related stuff. School itself, the classic 5-day week public school is probably a good example for a lot of teenagers of feeling pretty unsafe a lot of the time. And if we're in our sympathetic nervous system and feeling a little bit shut down or in flight all the time, then we're not going to be doing good learning. So even from a practical learning outcomes perspective, it makes sense to make that happen.
Well, what we know from the science is escape avoidance behaviour is something we see in the presence of aversives, and it sounds like that's potentially a thing to be curious about with regards to the difference in context between safe spaces and where these kids are hanging out, and maybe can help to at least create a space for us to explore as to why they're different. Does therefore what they learning in the context of you and learning about positive reinforcement and developing empathy and compassion for other beings, does that help them in those other contexts? Is that the feedback that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, I think so. It does. I mean, this is what I'm hearing. So teenagers who are dealing with really difficult interactions with peers at school, for example, telling me about those afterwards and telling me about how they are able to think about antecedents and consequences, think about compassion for the other people around them, even if those other people are not doing things that they particularly like. I feel like there's a bit of a story that a lot of us tell ourselves, or I don't know, that compassion is for people that we like. It's sort of, I guess that's the easy one, right? Like, it's easy to feel compassion for your friends, for your parents, for your siblings most of the time, all that kind of stuff. More difficult to feel compassion for the bully at school who's making your life hell. But actually, and I'm not talking about allowing behavior or not holding healthy boundaries, because holding healthy boundaries is a huge topic of conversation with my kids' classes, both around the interactions with the animals in both directions and also for themselves. But I'm just talking about, so having compassion and therefore understanding better their own reactions to things and how to respond in the moment. A personal example, when I experience road rage, like someone doing something on the road that I don't like, I'm always thinking to myself, well, if I was to, I don't know, drive up the back of them or flash my lights at them, is it going to change their behaviour? Like, I'm driving along going, yeah, but I'm just going to get all upset and angry. And is there any point? Because their behaviour won't change. They're just going to pass the car and go on and do the same thing to someone else. So maybe I just won't bother. That's so, and I see the same thing in the kids, in that they're becoming more aware of their own behaviour, the way their own behaviour can impact on others' behaviour, how they can inspire behaviour change in other people, basically. And vice versa. So, and again, this comes back to the beginning, doesn't it, of what we were talking about, of how learning about these things with animals and the way that it can actually impact an entire life and the wider picture of behaviour.
When I think about going to summer school, when I think about going to summer school, when I think about summer going to school and the potential for someone to be acting towards her in a way that we might label as bullying, one of the big things I want her to learn is compassion. So that's amazing to hear you say that and to incorporate that into my thinking about how to teach her compassion for everyone, not just for people she likes.
Yeah, I've just got an example of that. I had a teenager come to me and say, tell me a story about something that happened at school, and then followed it very quickly with saying, I wonder if her grandmother died, or I wonder if she's having a really hard time from her dad at home. And I was just like, wow, that's pretty huge, actually. We're talking about someone who had given her a hard time at school, and she was really, really finding that behaviour challenging, whether we're going to call it bullying or, whatever, but that sort of behaviour. And she immediately switched into, I wonder why. WTF, what's the function? And what's the cause? What are the antecedents for that behaviour? So pretty cool, hey?
Getting curious That's an amazing skill. Hey, thank you so much for sharing everything so far, Bex. And I'm super keen to dive even deeper now with even more ideas and tips for those in our podcast audience who might be already working with kids and / or might be thinking about doing so in the future. And I believe you've come up with a list of 5 things the listeners of this show can do to grow their skills, knowledge, and confidence in working to teach our science to the younger generation. Can you start us off, please, with number 1?
Sure. So I thought about these 5 things in the manner of how most of us would be approaching a training session with an animal. Because again, like I said, these are learners, same as our animals are learners. Presumably most people listening to this podcast have some degree of experience with animal training already. And so that is probably a framework that makes sense to your brain and sits pretty comfortably. So if the idea of working with kids and animals is super appealing to you, but you're feeling like, where do I even start? Or how could I do that? Or I don't, know how to do these things, then we're going to put it in that sort of framework. So one of the things is to think about planning your training session. In other words, designing your program. So the first question, which relates back to something I mentioned earlier, is think about what's reinforcing for you. That would be my advice on where to start. So I'm talking about the person, not if you've been approached by someone saying, can you please do X, Y, Z for this group, then maybe that's a slightly different scenario. But for those of you, and I have many, many people contact me through email and social media asking me for coaching or mentoring or advice on how to get started doing this stuff. So I'm really talking to those kind of people. So what's reinforcing for you? So what's the dream? Are you imagining a program similar to mine where you're using your own animals, and you don't have to have dogs and cows and pigs and everything under the sun like I do? Maybe you've got a group of dogs, or maybe you've got a bunch of horses or whatever. So are you wanting to do more like my Pup Stars program where you're working with their animals and the kids, or going into people's homes and working with kids and their own dogs, those kind of scenarios. So obviously those are very different situations that would call for very different advice. Are you interested in working with groups or individuals? So again, I often talk to people who resonate really strongly with either one or the other of those. As you can hear from what I've been saying, groups, community learning is where my passion is. I have a thriving online membership for positive reinforcement horse trainers, and the power of that community comes from the community. The fact that it's a group of people and it just exponentially explodes the passion and the excitement and the motivation and the inspiration and the learning. So I'm a huge fan of group teaching, and I enjoy doing it, but some people much prefer individuals. So thinking about that, thinking about the size of the groups, financially, what can you manage, and also what's going to work best for the learning outcomes of the individuals. You've got the obvious things like, are we talking about a weekly program for an hour, or are we talking about all day for once a month? Or and the other thing about that when you're planning is what age groups are we talking about? Because the skills and the ideas and the content that you need for a group of 5 to 8 year olds is very different from what you need for a group of 11 to 14 year olds or whatever. And if you're not involved a lot with kids at the moment, if you're not a parent, or if you are a parent but you haven't been involved with lots of different age groups, don't worry too much, because my experience is that it will become obvious as you go, and you will also learn what you enjoy the most. So like I said, just be ready to pivot and change if it's not working for you. And where's your reinforcement lie in terms of what you teach and what you want to be talking about? Because man, if you're gonna be doing something, when I run my next gen programs, I'm out there from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. I've got a summer camp coming up next week where I'm going to be with these kids for 3 days nonstop. You better be sure that I'm going to be talking and thinking about things that I find interesting. So for me, that's the training and behaviour. For other people, it might be more the science, the ethology, or for others, if you're into the sort of the more equine assisted therapy or the therapy dog type world, that would be a whole nother, a different side of it. So for example, as you've heard, for me, teens are the dream. I'm not personally interested in sort of childcare. I prefer small groups, sort of 4 to 6 kids. 4 to 6 kids per adult. So my next gen groups are bigger, but I have 3 to 4 coaches, including myself. And I really like the nerdy training stuff, and I really like the personal development relationship stuff. other people on my team are good at the silly games and the crafts, and there's a place for that for sure. But it's just not where my talent lies. And so outsourcing the expertise is always a good idea. So planning your session and designing your program, that was the sort of the first one that I came up with.
Number two,
I want to talk about managing expectations. So yours, the parents, the child's. So when I talk about managing your expectations as the coach, as the teacher, we're thinking about learning outcomes. Keep the bar low, even lower, about even lower, maybe a little bit lower than that, and now begin, because now you can lift it up as you go. But if you go in there thinking that you're going to be churning out literal animal trainers in the space of 5 weeks, you're going to be disappointed. You're also going to be trying to cram too much information into their little heads. So throw yourself back into what it was like to be a kid at school. And we've all had teachers who basically tried to download the curriculum into your brain, and then other teachers who got us excited, right, and engaged. And the learning happens through the doing, not through the talking. So you're there to plant seeds and light fires, to take two completely different analogies, but not there to download information into their heads. So thinking about your learning outcomes and keeping the bar low, they don't have to be as nerdy as you are about your particular area of choice, but maybe one day they will be if you play your cards right. So those are your expectations. And also in terms of animal welfare, expect that these kids know nothing about animals and that your animals may be at risk if you don't manage the situation. So don't go into it assuming that the parents are going to be like you and have taught their kids about safety with dogs or where to pat a horse or how to feed a whatever. Just, you've got to take things right from the beginning, because you're going to get a range of people with a range of knowledge. And so the expectations of parents, this is a big one. So for those that are thinking about working with kids, you need to tune in and stop multitasking right now, because parental expectations is huge. So this is what will make you or break you, because the parents are the ones that pay for your programs, and they are the ones who bring their kids along and who have to fit it into their busy schedule. And if the parents are not on board, you will not be able to teach and inspire those children. So setting expectations for kids starts well before the class begins, right? So we're talking about your marketing words. We're talking about your onboarding process once they sign up, once they register their kid, the emails that you send, the phone calls that you have, all that kind of stuff. So, for example, when I first started advertising, people would call me and they would want riding lessons. They would be asked, can I please, do you offer riding lessons? Because I have an 8-year-old who's really into horses. And I would feel a whole lot of pressure, a whole lot of like I wasn't able to meet what I can offer riding lessons. I do offer riding lessons, but I knew what they wanted, and what they wanted is what a traditional riding stable offers. And I simply wasn't prepared to do that. And in the beginning, I remember struggling with the feeling of like, are they going to be unhappy with what I'm offering? Are they not going to want to give it a chance? Are they not going to understand the fact that I prioritize my horses' welfare and well-being over their child's riding skill? Which, let's be honest, at a traditional riding stable, it is about teaching the kid to rise to the trot. It's not about how the horse is feeling. That's in fact the very last thing that anyone ever would think to talk about. And so their frame, I was very worried about that, too worried about that. So what happened in the end was that I gave myself a stern talking to, and I responded to these inquiries with an open mind and with a passion talk, basically, about what I do offer. I was straight up, I don't offer riding lessons the way that you may have seen them offered, but this is what I do. We work with the horses, we learn about the horses, we learn to communicate with them, we learn about how their needs are also important, and we learn about how they deserve body autonomy and respect and consent, the same as our children do. We learn about how to ride if the horse is keen on the idea. All that. So I would give them a little passion talk, and then at the end of the phone call, they would be over the moon excited. Absolutely, without exception, they were excited about the idea of what I was offering. They were like, I don't want riding lessons, I want that. What is that? What is that called? And this is your next problem, right? This is something that Ryan and I have talked about recently, is developing your, what I call the elevator pitch, right? Your brand, your story. Like, how do you describe what you do? Because those people weren't calling asking for riding lessons for their child because that's what the child wanted. They were calling asking for that because that is the only thing they knew what to ask for. So if people don't know that this exists, then why on earth would they call you and ask for it? So that hopefully will give people some comfort that absolutely without exception, when I explain to people what it is we do, they want it much more than what they were originally asking for. So on occasion, they will go elsewhere and have like more traditional writing lessons as well, because maybe they do want to become a better writer. And in fact, we now offer writing lessons here that they can do separately. But and then managing the expectations of the parents, in other words, means making it clear what it is their kids are actually there for. If they bring their child for a lesson or a group class and they know there's horses involved and they have a picture in their head of what they did when they were 10 and they went to a riding lesson and this is what it looked like and this is what my kid will achieve, you're going to get disgruntled parents and you're going to lose clients, because even if it's wonderful what you're offering, because you're not meeting their expectations. So think about that from an animal training perspective. I always think that animal frustration and anxiety comes when expectation doesn't meet reality. So if the animal has an expectation of a high rate of reinforcement and you don't provide it, they're going to feel frustrated. How can we make expectations and reality meet so that everyone is feeling happy and fulfilled? So that is a big one when you're offering kids classes.
Awesome. I'm looking at time, so I'm going to say just push on with 3, 4, and 5. I'm loving this so far. Thank you.
Cool. These are quicker ones. So arranging antecedents and identifying reinforcers. So antecedents as in class sizes and adult to child to animal ratios. So just thinking about safety and all that kind of stuff. Space set up for safety and for convenience for classes. Having the right animals with the right training, or assessing the animals beforehand so that you're not inviting a potentially dog-reactive dog to a pup stars class where you've got kids handling them. How to ensure learners feel safe and engaged. So all that stuff is about arranging your antecedents. Reinforcers for the kids. So one of my first questions with group classes for junior animal trainers is, what pets do you have at home? And the next week it's, what if you could train your animals to do anything, what would it be? And there's we go around the circle, and these are just fun icebreakers, but there's a reason I'm asking those questions. It's because if they've got a desperate dream to train their bunny, then, learning about cooperative care with a horse is going to be interesting, but it's not going to set them on fire. So angling your content to the child. Do you have a pony girl, or do you have a science nerd, or do you have an active outdoorsy kid? Some animal kids are shy and connection craving, and other ones are real bossy A-type that just like the animal to do what they say. So getting a feel on the people you're working with. But the big one is that kids need to see quick results to light a fire in them. So let them work with existing well-proofed behaviours that your animals already know. That's probably a big piece of advice. They can cue things, not train things. Often at the end of a class of new kids, I'll say, what did you learn today? And they'll say, I taught the dog to spin. I'm like, yeah, pretty sure I taught him that 2 years ago. But, that they feel like they taught the dog to do something, even though all they've done is cued it. They can get the horse to smile. They can, whatever, and they can walk away going, wow, like that was possible. That was a thing that I created. And meanwhile, they're practicing their reinforcement and their cueing skills. So having animals to work with that have existing well-proofed behaviours that they will respond to a variety of ages and sizes and voices and things like that, I have found to be super useful. So I've got lots of different types of animals. Part of the reason why I started training sheep is because the horses were struggling emotionally with having groups of kids and having so many different kids working with them, and I wasn't prepared to sacrifice their welfare. They were a little more sensitive. The sheep will just work all day long for anyone that has a snack. My dog, now that he's 3, is quite resilient and he'll work for anybody. So having a selection of animals, if the horses have had enough, we'll move to the sheep. If the sheep are tired, then we'll go to the dog. So, and the next one is about session format. So thinking about engagement, coming up with games, hands-on, practical things. So they don't learn through talking, they learn through doing. If you haven't heard of Tag Teach or learned about Tag Teach, visit the Tag Teach website. There is a free course so that you can learn all about the Tag Teach principles, which is really aimed at how can we reduce the words and how can we, get the human behaviour refined without just all of the words. Giving them brain breaks. One I feel quite strongly about is toning the language appropriately to the age group. So a lot of people really talk down to or baby talk kids, and they don't do it because they think they're stupid. I think it's just maybe that they're uncomfortable teaching or something like that. But we don't want to baby talk. We also don't want to jargon and to science-ify it too much. But it's not just teenagers that appreciate being spoken to as human beings. My little boy's just turned 9, and since he was 6. He's very articulate and bright. And I've always talked to him his whole life, just like he's another person. He doesn't need things dumbed down. He wants to know all the details. He wants to have conversations and discussions. And so, so especially 7 to 8 plus really like to be spoken to like you respect them, and of course we do. So so toning the language appropriately is one that we can all sort of feel our way through. And then my last one is thin slicing criteria. So how can we break it down without dumbing it down? So I'm going to give you an example sort of related to your earlier question, Ryan, which was about what do you actually do in the classes. So for example, week 1, an outcome that I want is I want the kids and the parents to see us feeding snacks generously. So my outcome for week 1 of a new group of kids, so this is junior animal trainers, the sort of 6 to 12 age group, literally this is what is written down in my lesson plan. We feed lots of snacks, but we understand why. That is it. So we don't just feed to make the animal love us. We're feeding to change behaviour. But the entire hour, as we walk around, meet the different animals, I show them some of the things that the animals can do. We feed lots of snacks, but we understand why. That's it. Same with the dog class. We feed lots of reinforcement, but we do it for a reason. That's what I want them to walk away with. If that is literally, what did you learn today? We just fed lots of food, but we only did it when the animal did the right thing. That is my learning outcome for week 1. Like we're not teaching about antecedents. We're not teaching about rate of reinforcement. It's just bring it right down to the thing that really matters, because it gets rid of that cultural fog. If that adult in their home can see me feeding lots of food and achieving these amazing results, then they're going to get rid of some of that cultural fog of feeding treats is bad or it's bribery or whatever. So I want the parents to see it as well, if possible, as well as the kids. And then I like to weave in, so again, for the parents' sake, narrating what I'm doing, I like to weave in a lot, especially with all of the kids, actually, every age group, concepts of body autonomy and consent. So we don't grab and hug our dog with 2 arms. We don't push and yank with our friends or with our animals. Why would we do that? If you don't hit your friends, do you? No. Do you hit your animals? No. If we want the horse to stand on the pedestal, we want the sheep to go through the tunnel, I'll narrate for the parents' sake as well for the kids. It's her body and she's telling us she doesn't want to be touched that way. So how else could we get her in there? How else could we convince her it's a good idea? How can we get her on board? So parents really resonate with that message, as you can imagine, and they begin to understand a little more why we do what we do and the way that we do it when you narrate it for both the parents and the kids' sake, so that they can understand that we're implanting some much deeper life lessons in here about compassion and consent and respect and all that than just a fun activity where the kid learns to teach tricks. So just week 2, for example, just to continue the curriculum thing, that week 2 is timing matters. So they're not like humans, because we can't explain to them that it was the effort they put into their project 3 days ago or the fact that they emptied the dishwasher yesterday. That's the reason they're getting an ice cream today. We can't explain that to them. So timing matters. So we're talking about like really breaking it down without dumbing it down. Yeah, that was 5 things.
It was, and I know that if you are listening to the show and you're working with kids or thinking about it, that's going to be super helpful. I've written down number 1 is planning your training sessions. Number 2, managing expectations, and a big focus there on parents' expectations. Number 3, arranging antecedents and identifying reinforcers. Number 4, we talked about session format, and number 5 was thin slicing criteria. Thank you so much, Bex, for sharing all of that with us. We're going to wrap up soon, but before we do, can you just share with the listeners of this show where they can go online to find out more about what you do, get in touch with you, and potentially share again about some exciting things you might have coming up in 2023?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook. So the name is Positively Together. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and website and all of that stuff. And the links will be there, I'm sure. I post a real range of stuff on my social media, which is like from the fun and the cute right through to the educational. So that's worth a scroll through. I have, like I said, an online membership called Positively Us, which is for positive reinforcement horse people. that will be opening its doors soon. And the new exciting thing, which I wanted to talk about, which I am gearing up to open very soon, is called Shaping the Future. So basically, I've been posting videos and talking about these beautiful experiences I'm having with these kids programs on social media for some years. And every time I do, I get enthusiastic inquiries and from trainers around the world wanting advice on how they might design and launch similar programs, or asking for advice if they've been asked to present, for example, to a group of, a school or a group of Cub Scouts or whatever. People will contact me and say, have you got ideas for what I could do with these kids to get the learning across and also let them have some fun? So I get all these questions about how could I create something like this at my sanctuary or at my little backyard petting zoo. I want to start having kids visit, or that kind of thing. And so, and also dog people. I've got a lady here in New Zealand who's built an amazing charity with bringing her dog into schools and working with special needs kids with her dog. And I've been consulting with her for several years now, and it's now an official charity, and she's doing wonderful things with the kids of Wellington. So that charity is called Ted's Space, if anyone wants to look into it. But Shaping the Future is a result of all of these conversations and these one-on-ones and the mentoring and the guidance that I've done with people over the years, one-on-one, about developing programs, their own programs that are similar to what I'm doing or inspired by what I'm doing. And I am a big believer, and again, I'm going to come back to a Dr. Susan Friedman-ism, which is that all of us are smarter than one of us. I'm a huge believer in community learning and in sort of think tanks and all that kind of stuff. So Shaping the Future is going to be just that. It's going to be a coaching collective, a community. So those of us who are interested in teaching kids and animals in any capacity can come together to share ideas and advice, to gain support, to get inspired, to ultimately get started with changing the world. So if anyone's got a special interest in the field in any capacity, even if it's just your own kids or your kids' friends, all the way up to people who are wanting to design full-on programs, Shaping the Future will be a home for us to get together and to talk about all that. So I have a waitlist building for that group, and it'll launch soon. So I'm excited about that.
Amazing. And did you say where to go to join the waitlist?
There is a link that I will send you that will be on the it'll be on my website, and it'll also be on the podcast information thing that you're going to. My website is actually clickertraining.co.nz. I have not got around to changing it. The landing page for the waitlist for Shaping the Future is www.subscribepage.com/shapingthefuture. So subscribepage.com/shapingthefuture. And there'll also be another link I've sent you, Ryan, of an adorable series of videos that I did when we were all in COVID lockdown, which were by my young students, teaching other kids how to train tricks to their animals. So anyone who's involved with teaching kids, you're welcome to use those and share them around, and they're pretty cute. So
marvellous.
I'll make sure you've got all of that.
As Bex said, we will link to all of this in the show notes as well. Hey, Bex, this has been educational and a ton of fun. So from myself and on behalf of everyone listening, we really appreciate everything you're doing and for taking the time to come on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was good fun.
We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behaviour geeks. That's it for this episode though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much everyone for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.